Celo is based on two core values. The first is a belief that everybody has a unique purpose, and the second is a belief that everyone is connected.
Celo's mission is to build a monetary system that creates conditions of prosperity for all. And what we see today is 1.7 billion people in the world who are unbanked or underbanked.
The way we kind of look at this is, let's start where are the biggest problems, where we can have the biggest impact pretty much immediately. But ultimately, it's about building kind of a new infrastructure that can benefit everyone.
One thing that's quite unique is that this is a mission-first company that then looks to use the right technology versus a technology-first company that tries to find a product-market fit.
It's rare to be able to kind of do very difficult cutting-edge computer science that ultimately has a research component to it that at the same time has that level of impact.
You really shouldn't need to know how crypto works. You shouldn't need to have any understanding of blockchain to be able to have access to the benefits that sending and receiving stable value provides.
When you see some of the problems, like very high fees for even just sending money to a friend, or the lack of credit scores prohibiting people from getting access to a loan, or even just the ability to send money across borders, there's a lot of potential to improve that and to make sending money as easy as sending a text.
We're trying to create a global monetary system that works for everybody. And in order to do that, we have to make sure everyone's perspectives are brought together, because everyone adds a unique and different perspective.
Office culture is incredibly open, warm, fun, whether it's a technical decision or just banter. Everyone brings so much to the table. We have folks who've accomplished incredible things in a variety of domains, whether it's global development, whether it's scaling startups, running large organizations. Everyone really brings something different.
Not only is everyone here really smart and really intelligent, but we're all united by this kind of core mission to really help people around the world.
Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone here in San Francisco, as well as at our events in Berlin, Buenos Aires, Nairobi, New York, and of course everyone joining on the live stream. My name is René Reinsberg, and I'm one of the founders of Celo. This is a journey that began about 2 years ago when my co-founders Seb, Merrick, and I felt like the time was right to start working on a new technology stack for a better monetary system. One that would be open and accessible to all, one that could enable economic prosperity for all. And today we're open sourcing our entire code base and design, and we're also launching publicly the first prototype of Celo's platform, the Alfajores Testnet, and the accompanying wallet. So this is an early milestone, but it's very exciting to see how many people have already joined this movement. Whether it's the 50 people contributing to Celo on the C-Labs team, or fellows around the world, early backers such as Andreessen Horowitz and Polychain Capital, mission-aligned organizations like Give Directly and the UN World Food Programme, or the over 6,400 community members who've been following our progress and joining us on events. We've actually held over 64 community events around the world so far, from Seoul to Beirut to Dar es Salaam, and just earlier this week, Mexico City. So this is actually a great time to thank everyone who's helped us get here so far. So I want to personally say thank you. But also welcome the many new faces to our community. As for today's agenda, we'll first hear from my colleague Nitya why Celo matters and how it addresses some of the shortcomings of the existing financial system. We'll then have Asa walk us through some of the technical details of the Celo protocol and some of the exciting key innovations behind it. And then we'll share a little bit of an outlook to what we think Celo can enable longer term. At the end, there will be a Q&A, and so for folks on the live stream, in the description, there's a little link so you can add your questions, and we're excited to start the conversation today. But first, and some of you may be wondering, why would you name, your first testnet after some cookies? And so let me tell you a little story. So there's Hugo. Hugo and his wife live in rural Argentina, and they're trying to make ends meet and deal with hyperinflation. And so Hugo is running a few side businesses, one including making fresh, delicious alfajores. And we met him while we were doing user research in Argentina, and we felt it would be really nice to name our first testnet for Hugo and folks like him that are looking for stable, sound currency. And we also feel that this connection, or this reference to food is actually very appropriate. Food is commonly gifted. It's a humble, essential fabric that links sort of us to our communities each day. And so we feel that's very appropriate, not just for the work we're doing today, but for what we think Celo could be in the future. And with that, welcome again, and I'll hand it over to Nitya.
Hi, everyone, and again, welcome. Thank you to everyone here in person as well as on the live stream. And so, I'm Nitya. I work on products for the Celo ecosystem. So, as Renee mentioned, Alfajores is just one decision or one kind of direction that we've taken that was inspired by users we've met. Hugo is one of many people who we've had the pleasure of learning from as we take on this very ambitious mission. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about another user who we met who has really motivated and inspired the team. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Kaburu. We met Kaburu a few months ago when the team went to the Nyarugusu refugee camp in Tanzania to do research with the World Food Program. So Kaburu is 47 years old. He's a former fisherman from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In 1998, Kaburu had to leave the DRC when they were facing the second civil war, the worst conflict since World War II. And he's lived in Nyarugusu for the last 22 years. So Kaburu has some sense of stability now. However, there are certain things that his circumstances prevent him from accessing and that prevent him from reaching his full potential. Though Kaburu has a smartphone that he can use to access the world, to access others, mobile money is impossible for him to access due to legal restrictions. Because he has no ID, even the most basic financial instruments are off limits. Even saving cash is not an option because of threats to physical safety and theft. Kaburu can't build wealth, and the last 22 years he spent in limbo as a result. So unfortunately, Kaburu is not alone in the challenges he faces with the current financial system and that affect his livelihood. Kaburu is one of 1.7 billion people globally who are unbanked and one of 1.1 billion people globally who have no formal ID. Even if Kaburu had access to digital money, he would have to pay remittance fees of up to $15 to send a payment abroad and could incur transfer fees of up to 20%. So I think it's clear here that there's a large gap in what is available currently and what would be ideal for someone like Kaburu. So next I'm going to talk just a little bit about how the Celo team has approached kind of solving this problem to date, or has approached making progress here. So kind of in seeing the needs of people like Kaburu as one example and what exists, it's really clear that we need to be holistic in understanding the needs of users and work with them to really make progress and to improve upon what exists.
So a little bit about Celo. Celo is a financial product for people like Kuburu that's powered by a full stack solution comprised of a social wallet app today with hopefully many more applications to come, all built on a platform with stable store of value and lightweight identity to provide easy means of transferring value. So today we're excited to be releasing the alpha version of the Celo wallet for Android, powered by the Alfajores test network that Renee mentioned earlier. So our test application is currently available for Android with iOS coming later this year. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about one example of how we took an end user need and built with someone like Kuburu to solve a need that exists. So I'm just going to talk about one example. So identity. So identity really comes down to a question of access. So without identity, it's impossible for someone to find you, and it's similarly impossible to find others. So for people like Kuburu, cell phones already provide some access, but today that access doesn't extend to money. So the way that the Celo identity protocol addresses this is in enabling people to map their phone number to a Celo address. So through this on-chain mapping, someone's phone number links access to funds. And so the protocol relies on mapping of phone number hashes to blockchain addresses. And in one step, this enables two things. So one, it allows for mobile payments to occur. And two, it enables for low-cost blockchain-based transfers that remove the hassle of dealing with cumbersome addresses. So now with just an Android phone and a phone number, a user can now receive payments. So now we'll go ahead and see how this plays out for a user, and I'll be walking through the experience of how this looks as someone's just getting started with the Celo wallet. So I guess first a couple of things that we're really excited about with the wallet. So one, it's fully self-custodied. So this means that Kuburu and only Kuburu can access his funds. Two, we can receive payments without already having an address. So this is also really exciting because it means that you can send money to someone else without waiting for them to get set up first. And third, we run an ultralight client on the phone, which Asa will be telling us more about. So now taking a look at the experience, we see that, so right now we're just going to wait for this video to kind of wrap up, and then we're going to walk through the initial flow of getting started on Celo. And so here we just see the end of the verification process. And I'll talk a little bit more about what this is a little bit later. But as we get started with Celo, key to getting started is an invitation code. So you'll see this invitation code in just a little bit. It looks a lot like what you might get if a friend refers you to any of your favorite apps today. But there's a lot going on kind of under the hood. So this invitation code is actually a temporary wallet. So why might someone need a temporary wallet? In order to pay for the computation to get verified, it's necessary to have some funds first to pay for gas or on-chain computation. And so what we see here is we're going to input this invite code. And now what we have is the user now has access to enough funds to get verified. And so once we're done confirming this, we're going to move into the verification process. So what happens now is 3 text messages are sent from different places. This ensures that the user has access to the phone number that they're verifying. And so what we see now is once these 3 different attestations are received, the user, we know, has access to this number, and they can now go ahead and get transported into an experience where they can easily send money to anyone who's on Celo and receive money from anyone as well. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Asa, who's going to talk more about the protocol powering this whole experience.
Well, thank you, Nitya. So I'm Asa. Pleasure to meet you. I work on engineering here, and I'm really excited to tell you more about what we've been working on for the Celo protocol and share it with you all today. Just a heads up to the non-technical folks in the audience, this is in parts going to be a bit of a deep dive, so if I do lose you, I will do my best to find you again. But before we dive in, I'd like to make sure that we frame this conversation in the context of our mission, which is to build a monetary system that enables the conditions for prosperity for all. And that's a really, really tall order, and something that can't be achieved just by building a protocol. That protocol needs to have a rich ecosystem of applications solving real user problems running on top of it. And for that to be possible, we identified a few properties that that protocol needs to have. And so what are they? First, it needs to be open. Celo's mission is wildly ambitious, and we will need as many people as possible from all around the world to contribute in order for us to have a chance at success. And there are many ways to contribute. You can run a validator node to help create blocks and secure the network. You can run a full node and earn transaction fees in exchange for serving light clients, like those running in the Celo wallet that Nitya just showed you. You can participate in validator elections and on-chain governance by staking Celo Gold, the native token of the Celo platform. And because Celo is an open source project, you can contribute code and documentation on GitHub as of this morning. Second, it needs to be programmable so that anybody can build on top of it. This project has a really large surface area. And in order for us to have a chance at success on delivering on our mission, we chose to build on some of the crypto community's best work, Ethereum. This means that the Celo protocol is fully EVM compatible. And while we expect that the best user experiences built on top of Celo will take advantage of some of its unique features, this does mean that all of your favorite Ethereum dApps and developer tools will work on the Celo platform. Finally, it needs to be mobile first, built for low resource environments. In order to achieve prosperity for all, it really makes sense to start with those who have yet to achieve it. And while many of these folks have a cell phone plan, have a cell phone, a smartphone, they often they're constrained in other ways. They might have kind of limited access to charge their phone. They might have high bandwidth costs or low tech and financial literacy. And the features of the Celo protocol were really designed with these people in mind. And so where there are many such features, I'd like to quickly highlight just these 7 of them behind me and end with a deeper dive into the last 2. The first feature is stable value currencies. So for millions of people around the world, their local fiat currency is failing them, and in many cases due to hyperinflation. And in the extreme cases, this is really devastating. Just as an example, year-over-year inflation estimates for Venezuela last year, I think hover around 1,000,000%, which is staggering, right? And so in circumstances like this, people seek to move wealth into more stable assets, but often face obstacles in doing so. And so we built an algorithmic stability protocol that allows us to peg ERC20-like tokens to real-world assets, starting with the US dollar, so that stable value currencies can be accessible to everybody all around the world. Celo has a lightweight identity protocol that allows for a decentralized mapping of phone numbers to public keys that powers the user experience that my friend Nitya just showed you. Celo has on-chain governance so that anyone with Celo Gold can participate in protocol decision-making. Celo runs on a Byzantine fault-tolerant based proof-of-stake protocol so that users see their transactions finalized quickly and with low transaction fees. Celo is programmable so that anybody can build applications on top, such as decentralized peer-to-peer lending. And I'll spend a bit more time on these last 2 features because I think they're a really nice illustration of how user research drove some of our decision-making around the Celo protocol. So the first feature that I'd like to dive into is the ability to pay for transaction fees in stable value currencies like Celo dollars. So I was actually fortunate enough to be in the Nairobi camp earlier this year and have the opportunity to talk to Kaburu. And when we were demoing an early version of our wallet application, he had some questions about what Celo Gold was used for. And he wasn't the only one. This is actually kind of a common thread through a lot of our interviews during that trip. And of course, if you're familiar with cryptocurrencies, one answer is that it can be used to pay for transaction fees. In order to keep cryptocurrency networks secure, transactions need to have fees associated with them, usually payable in the native currency of the platform, in our case, Celo Gold, which means that if Kaburu were to receive a cash transfer from an agency like the UN, and then take that cash transfer and go to buy food at a local merchant, he would need a balance in both Celo dollars and Celo Gold in order to make that purchase. And I think we probably all feel this very intuitively. That's a really confusing user experience. Kaburu should not need to hold balances in 2 different currencies just to transfer one of them. And he doesn't, because paying for transactions in ERC20-like currencies is natively supported on the Celo platform. So how does it work? It's actually really easy to add support for this. It's only a few lines of code. You just need to extend the ERC20 interface to support 2 additional functions, one to debit the transaction fee, and one to credit the transaction fee, and that's it. And you can do this in as little as half a dozen lines of code. Second feature that I'd like to dive into is our ultra-light sync protocol. So as I mentioned before, the Celo platform is designed for users in resource-constrained environments. Pictured here is one of the cell phone charging stations in Nairobi, at which residents can pay to leave their phones charging for an hour or 2 at a time. Charging is unavailable because it's powered by solar when it's cloudy, when it's raining, and it costs a couple hundred shillings. And cell phone data plans are even more expensive. Many residents, in fact, all of the ones we talked to, are unable to afford as much data as they would like to use. And virtually all of them disable and curate the apps that run on their phone to remove applications that they perceive as being too data hungry. And so in order to build a truly inclusive protocol, it's really imperative that Celo be able to work well in low resource settings. And so that's what inspired our ultra-light sync protocol. So how does that work? Well, it really all starts with the BFT-based consensus algorithm that underpins the Celo network. Each day, or epoch, a new set of validator nodes is elected to block produce. The difference between this new set of validators and the previous set of validators is written into the block header of the last block of that epoch. And so for an ultralight node to sync with the network, all it really needs to do is figure out what the current validator set is. And so in order to do that, you just download the last header of each epoch and apply the validator set diff. And as an ultralight node, once you have that current validator set built up, you can validate any header in that epoch just by checking the signatures. And so this requires downloading literally tens of thousands of times fewer headers than the kind of typical light client sync. And it's, best of all, it's fully compatible with the light Ethereum subprotocol, which means that ultralight nodes can ask full nodes for Merkle proofs of state, allowing them to trustlessly participate in the Celo protocol. And we're actually working to make it even lighter. So BLS signature aggregation will allow us to reduce the size of these headers by up to 90%. And zero-knowledge proofs will allow us to bundle kind of a number of these syncing operations all into one, further reducing the amount of data that an ultralight node needs to download in order to sync with the blockchain. I'm excited to say, really excited to say, that all of these amazing features are live right now on Alfajores. If you want to learn more, I'd encourage you to check out our documentation at docs.celo.org, where you can find explanations of everything I just told you about and much more. And you can even get your hands dirty by walking through some of our tutorials around how to run a validator node or a full node. Finally, as of today, all of Celo is open source. And I would invite you all to visit github.com/celo-org, where you can get up close and personal with everything that we've built and work together with us on our mission to build a monetary system that creates the conditions for prosperity for all. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Will to tell you more about that mission and some of our plans for the future.
Thank you, Asa. So now Renee, Nitya, and Asa have talked about who we are, the challenge we're hoping to address, and what we've built. I'd like to talk about the future that we hope to see. So Celo's mission is to build a monetary system that creates conditions of prosperity for all. The challenge is that the current monetary system often leaves many behind and prevents them from achieving this prosperity. As an example, let's revisit Nyaragusu camp. We learned a lot from our conversations with Kaburu and his neighbors, but perhaps one of the most surprising things that we found out was that many of the refugees in Nyaragusu were actually using the peas that they received as food ration as a form of money. Think about what that means for a second. That means that there's a problem of currency in the camp. People had things of value. They had desires for other goods or services, but because the current financial tools at their disposal weren't sufficient, they were unable to transact. So they had to get creative. They invented a new form of money. Well, fortunately, we have the opportunity to do a lot better than peas. So at Celo, when we asked ourselves the question, if we were to build a new monetary system, what does beautiful money look like? So most money today is actually created through the creation of interest-bearing debt. It's loaned into existence. As a result, there's now more debt in circulation than there's money. But it doesn't have to be this way. Money can be earned into existence. Let me tell you a story. So let's take Curitiba, Brazil. In the 1970s, this city in Brazil actually had a host of challenges. Many of the residents were living in these urban slums called favelas. There was a massive garbage problem because trucks weren't able to get down these narrow roads. The public transportation system was underutilized. And lastly, unemployment was very rampant. So in 1971, the city introduced a really interesting scheme. It allowed residents to collect garbage and then trade it in for tokens that could be used to ride the bus. This scheme was so popular, in fact, that after a while, people started trading bus tokens. They started using their bus tokens to buy things, and it eventually evolved into a form of money. But it doesn't stop there. A lot of residents were actually using their bus tokens to go downtown to find jobs. So after a while, Curitiba saw a lot of change. Not only was the city much, much cleaner, but GDP growth in Curitiba started to outpace that of the surrounding state and Brazil overall. So these examples illustrate a couple things. One, the current monetary system doesn't work for many folks. And two, when given the opportunity, people get creative. They invent new forms of money, new ways to exchange that enrich their own lives and that of their community. That's the spirit we hope to capture with Celo. Anybody can build on top of the Celo platform to create solutions that are locally relevant, that are globally impactful, and ultimately beautiful. Well, money can also be gifted into existence. So the team working on Celo, we're really excited about another use case, this idea of a social dividend or a universal basic income. And we're working with the leading international aid organization to see that vision happen. Give Directly has chosen the Celo platform to deliver unconditional cash transfers to the extreme poor in West Africa. We're hopeful that this will prove a new model for aid delivery that is more efficient and more inclusive. And it's not the only one. We have several projects in the works with various UN organizations and international aid organizations around the world that are all focused about bringing the underbanked and formerly excluded back into the formal financial system. So I know this vision that we talk about is very ambitious, and we recognize that we cannot do it alone. So I invite you to get involved. There are several ways to do so. You can develop and contribute to our code base. You can run a node, either a validator node or a full node. You can also apply to become a fellow. So I actually started off as a fellow, and past fellows have received funding to do a variety of different things, from leading a research project to building zero-knowledge proofs to collecting educational materials for the community. We're also looking to host more events around the world. So if you're interested in that, please check out our website. And lastly, of course, we are hiring. So if you are interested in joining this wonderful team, please check out our jobs page for more opportunities. With that, I just want to thank you again for your time. We're going to open it up to Q&A now. And as we get adjusted, so if you have like a question, please check out the poll online and submit your questions or upvote other questions. And as we get situated and collect more, I'm going to play a short video that inspires us. Thank you.
A token, a symbol of hard work, of skills, for trust between people. Money was meant to be exchanged for things created and services provided. It takes many forms, both plain and shiny, honoring leaders of the past and those leading us into the future. Somewhere we lost our way. People waged wars over it, big and small, concerned more with growing interest on $244 trillion in debt than growing communities. And many people are left out. 1.7 billion invisible, left behind and underserved. But what if money were more accessible to everyone? A universal symbol for essential needs, for empowerment and connection. People, communities, entire countries prospering. What if money were all of this? What if money were beautiful?
Ron's, do we have some questions?
Awesome. So we'll ask our first 4 questions that, from the web. Why should I use Celo instead of Ethereum for smart contracts?
I can take this one. So Celo was built with a very specific use case in mind, and that is enabling a more open and inclusive financial system. And so any developer looking to leverage the kind of built-in attributes of lightweight identity through attestations or stable value would probably find the Celo platform useful. I guess other features such as the ones Asa mentioned around ultra-light sync, as well as gas being payable in non-native currencies could also be useful. But ultimately, I think the purpose with which Celo was built, I think anyone looking to build kind of decentralized financial applications might find Celo a good fit.
Are you interested in Latin America? If the answer is yes, what will be your strategy to acquire early adopters?
Well, the short answer is yes, we're interested in Latin America. But the longer answer is, yeah, we're interested in any place where there's a large population of underbanked or unbanked folk that need more access to financial tools. Specifically with Latin America, we've done a lot of work. So our first pilot was actually in Argentina with 450 university students. We've done a lot of user research in Colombia with Venezuelan economic migrants. And the team right now, there's part of the team right now that's actually in Mexico that's doing a lot of user research and conversation with partners. And the second part of the question was, how will we get our first users? Is that right?
What will be your strategy to acquire early adopters?
Right. So our strategy is the strategy of Celo is going to be different depending on the different countries. But at a high level, the things that are common is communities, the ecosystem is very important. And so we hope that in each of these countries, there will be a robust ecosystem of partners, of developers, of users that will enable Celo to grow and for folks to use it.
Great. The next question was submitted from Nairobi. Asa, what are you most excited about on the protocol side for the rest of the year?
I guess I should take this one. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer could be really long. If I had to pick one thing, I think it would be some of our research around privacy. So if you kind of think about, I guess, the expected users of the Celo platform, they're really some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And so if the platform doesn't properly protect their privacy, things could go really poorly for them. So we're kind of currently doing some research into how can we provide kind of the same guarantee, like privacy guarantees that Zcash has, but at the smart contract layer rather than kind of native, like at the lower level of the protocol. And the reason we're interested in doing that is because this kind of allows for, if you're familiar with Zcash, this allows for kind of like a shared privacy pool across tokens rather than kind of having like individual sectioned off privacy for each one, which provides actually additional privacy guarantees. And so we're doing some research into like a new type of Merkle structure that allows for fewer updates when inserting a commitment into the Merkle tree, which means it's much more efficient in terms of the in gas usage and the storage that each full node needs to save in order for this to be possible.
Great. We'll open up questions to our San Francisco audience after this question from New York. How are developers incentivized to build on Celo?
Yeah, so today we were focused more on the technical details and innovations of the platform, but there are many ways. So one specific example, Asa mentioned on-chain governance, and so out of the block rewards, an allocation will go towards a community fund that will basically be used to kind of pay for contributions and projects decided through kind of on-chain governance. But there are many other ways. So, very excited about some of the upcoming announcements we'll have around that in the coming weeks and months from also some of our community members.
Hi, I was wondering, so if Kaburu loses his phone or forgets his password, how does he get his money?
Yeah, that's a great question. So overall, the self-custody aspect of things relies upon a backup phrase. And so today, if you lose your backup phrase, just like with any other self-custodied system, you do lose access to your funds. And so user education and user research around the best practices for keeping these things safe is something that we actively are working on right now. Other options that we've explored involve leveraging kind of sharing, like some of the social fabric that exists. So potentially Kaburu could trust different people with different parts of his seed phrase. So that could just be one option. And we're exploring kind of further things there to come.
It's actually an interesting analogy on one of the user research trips in the community. Several people actually had a shared lockbox with kind of multiple keys to it, sort of like an offline, like multi-sig in a way. And that was working really well to kind of making sure that, collectively they were able to kind of save and have access to the funds when they decided. And so thinking about kind of how that translates into a digital experience, I think there's some really interesting parallels from sort of what's already happening today and bringing those kind of into the experiences.
Thanks. First, I just want to thank everyone from Celo for hosting this great event. I definitely learned a lot. I wanted to talk about, you talked about privacy. And I was wondering if you could share how you think about privacy, especially for individual users, which is very important, but then also from sort of the financial regulation side of concerns about anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, and how do you kind of thread both of those very important but somewhat disparate ideas?
Awesome. Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, without making this like a regulatory or policy debate, I think it's really important to, be considerate of both kind of aspects, right? On the one hand, of course, you want to comply with all the laws and regulations around the world. On the other hand, and this doesn't necessarily need to be at odds with that, if you think about sort of, consumer protections and the individual right to privacy, right? I think that's very important. That's particularly important, as Asa mentioned, to the most vulnerable populations. And so we feel there's a great approach here that we can bring, and we hope that some of our work and some of the work that others in the industry drive around privacy will actually shape how we as a society move from or move towards this cashless society, which is certainly something that's happening, but do so in a responsible way.
We'll take the next 3 questions from online submissions. Facebook's Libra has a mission very similar to Celo. How will it affect Celo, given all the obvious power and advantages that Facebook already has?
I think that's an easy one.
All right. Yeah, obviously lots of talk about Libra, this week. I think generally it's been great to have sort of their megaphone directed at the issue that we're, I think equally passionate about solving. And so even just thinking about Facebook using that megaphone to create awareness for crypto with sort of mainstream users, I think is really powerful, and kind of explaining, some of the key concepts and workings of the technology. I think ultimately, it's hard for us to kind of, say what will happen with Libra and where it will go, right? But we're very focused on solving the needs that we see in the communities where we're doing user research. Facebook has decided to start with a closed permission system. We're taking a more open, inclusive approach out of the gate. How it plays out longer term, I think that's going to be exciting for everyone to see. But yeah, overall, if we take a look at history, and I think Mary Meeker's stack had this statistic. It took us 30 years of the internet to get just over 50% of kind of worldwide penetration in terms of the global population. And so if we think about financial access or access to financial tools and services, it's going to take a lot more than Libra and Celo to get kind of over that hurdle, even in the next 10 years, right? And so the more the merrier.
We have a few questions about developers, so we've put 2 into this question. How can I get started on Celo as a developer? And is there a way to join the Celo testnet now and check things out?
I can take that one. Yeah, those are really good questions. So I guess I would point whoever is interested to look at our documentation at docs.celo.org, as well as our GitHub, github.com/celo-org. And I think that's a great place to get started. In the docs, you can read kind of a detailed description of everything that we've built, and you can see that in the GitHub repository. If you want to get started right now, in the docs, we have some tutorials on how to run a full node, which will sync with the network and serve light clients, earning transaction fees, and how to run a validator node. And so you can actually participate in our proof of stake protocol, vote for yourself as a validator, get elected, and start creating blocks. And so both of those tutorials are, again, at docs.celo.org.
We'll take a few questions from SF after this last online submission. What is the long-term role of C Labs? Is it a for-profit entity?
So yeah, I can take this. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. So like most other, organizations or kind of structures or protocol structures out there, there's kind of a protocol entity, and then there are operational entities that contribute towards the code base and kind of further the development. And C Labs is the first one. It's kind of got us here, but obviously we're interested in growing that ecosystem, and already now have other organizations and companies starting to contribute to our work. Like Asa mentioned, privacy, that's an area where we're partnering. So I expect that to continue to grow.
First of all, thank you so much for this incredible and beautiful vision, based on sacred commerce. It really touches me. So the question I have is from a layperson's perspective. You're really focused on supporting the unbanked in the developing nations. For those of us like in US and Europe, so will our first application on Celo likely be because we want to be transferring money to other people, or are there other potential applications that we could be using? And is that likely to happen in 2020, or is it going to be later than that for those of us, again, in the developing nations that you're not particularly focused on?
We can share this one. Yeah. So our focus right now is very much on emerging markets because that's where we think the need is greatest. And there's a lot of use cases that I think would be very powerful there. There's options later on for us to partner with folks to send money back from one country to another country. Obviously, cross-border payments are a really important use case for a lot of the folks that we hope to serve. And so in order to set that up, we have to have corridors and ecosystems on both sides of ecosystems on both sides of the corridor. And so we're really excited about that feature. I think Nitya can talk a bit more about our roadmap for that as well.
Yeah, so in terms of building applications on top of Celo, that's something that is certainly welcomed. And so anyone who sees an additional opportunity to build something impactful on top of Celo, whether that is sending money across borders, whether that is decentralized peer-to-peer lending, as Asa mentioned, there are so many different applications. And so I think all of us could agree that there's way more that can be built than even everyone in this room and everyone on this live stream can do. And so I think today is very much the beginning of that in open sourcing code, and we definitely hope to continue to see contributions and to see people who are excited about building things and supporting that.
Again, do you see that somebody like me here in San Francisco will be using your app, maybe by 2020, or is it going to be further down the road?
Yeah, I think it's a good question where I think ultimately right now we're initially really focused on really meeting the needs of the unbanked. And so I could see a future where where we build more, where there are more different developers building different applications. I think that there's definitely a large task ahead of us in terms of even that initial goal. And so I think we'll just have to see how things play out really.
Thank you. Thank you again for the beautiful vision, creating beautiful money.
Thanks.
We'll take our next two questions online. Can you share your thoughts on other stablecoin protocols like Terra and Reserve, what you guys liked about them, or what you decided to do differently?
I can take it first. Yeah. So I think one of the beautiful things about the blockchain ecosystem is that it's very collaborative. Obviously a lot of the projects are open source. We meet regularly with other projects in the space, and some are tackling similar use cases. I think the entire DeFi space, particularly as it pertains to developing emerging markets, is really exciting because it's an area that needs to be unlocked, right? And so I think that's generally, I love to see as many projects as possible going after this. I don't have any concrete comments on the technical architectures. I think some of that we'll see how it plays out longer term. This is obviously a phase where a lot of the tech stack is evolving and changing. As we can see, for example, with the move from proof of work systems to proof of stake systems, and so I expect the whole industry to keep evolving, and ultimately there's going to be some areas that are probably going to feel pretty commoditized in terms of this is the best way of creating stable value coins, or this is the best way to implement decentralized identity, or this is the best way to do consensus, right? And so in many ways, like I'm, welcome and encourage any experiments and people kind of trying to actually solve real user problems.
Our final two questions. Cash is a system we all know. What are Celo's thoughts on how people are more willing to use the blockchain on a daily basis? Also, are governments likely to be more open to allow the blockchain as an alternative to fiat?
I can take the first part of that question. So it's true, cash is still the dominant form of money in many parts of the world, but I think what inspires us is that there are examples of countries or communities that have actually adopted digital money in a really exciting way. So I used to live in Kenya, and if you guys are familiar with Kenya, M-Pesa, which is this mobile money system, has achieved 90% penetration in the country within 10 years of adoption. And this is a country that's fairly, that's not the richest country, that has a lot of technical and infrastructural constraints, but the need was so great for a solution like mobile money that it leapfrogged a lot of developed countries. And I think blockchain has the potential to do something very similar. We think that there are so many use cases for a system like ours that it could fit an important need and fill an important need for many folks. The challenge is usability, and that's why user research is a big part of what we do. We want to make sure that our solutions are resonant, are easy to use, and that's why a lot of the things that Ace talked about in the protocol are super paramount. And we hope that after a while, Celo will be as ubiquitous as cash.
Yeah, one thing to add. Obviously, cash is not going to go away overnight, right? I think in many markets, cash will kind of remain, important part of the social kind of payment fabric. And so a lot of our work too, in terms of the user research and the early conversation in the ecosystems, is around how do we provide, or how do we kind of ensure that they're kind of on and off ramps, and some of this work is already underway with respect to kind of cryptocurrencies more generally, but particularly with respect to Celo. It's important to us that if this is, for example, being used for cash transfers in West Africa, that people actually have the ability to pay with Celo currency to top up their phone, to pay at a local merchant. And so I think it's really important to, as Will said earlier, to look at the ecosystem kind of holistically and make sure that, we're not just providing sort of this digital currency kind of in vacuum, but it's kind of, it's actually useful from day one.
Great. This will be our last question. We received many really wonderful questions. So to preface this, we'll be hosting meetups around the world to answer those questions more. How does Celo simplify developers' experience compared to Ethereum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can take this one, I think. In many ways, I would say that they're similar. As I mentioned before, Celo is built on kind of top of the work that Ethereum did. And so from a developer experience perspective, a lot of things I think will look very familiar, which I think is a good thing. I would say developer tooling in the blockchain space is still in its nascent days. But some of the best tooling that we've seen is built around the Ethereum platform. And to be able to be compatible with that tooling, I think, is a really powerful thing. And so we will kind of contribute to those efforts and kind of address needs as we see fit. And we look forward to kind of pushing those contributions back up to the larger blockchain community.
Awesome. So we'll be around here in San Francisco to kind of answer more questions in the audience here. I know we have team members in actually all locations today as well to answer any additional questions. And then I'd also again like to direct you to the Celo website for other community events kicking off later today with kind of office hours. And so really this is the first step. This is the beginning in getting your feedback, getting your inputs, and working more closely together. And so we're excited for everyone joining today. And again, thank you everyone, and looking forward to working together.